It happens a lot. People are, they're just really not ingrained in developing and growing, and so something happens, and next thing you know, they react in a way, or they're drawn in and pulled away by people, instead of being grounded in what, which verse 15 says, instead, speaking the truth in love, we will in all things grow up in Him who is the head, that is Christ. From Him the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does His work. God talks here that maturity is a natural process. You cannot be a Christian, you cannot follow God, you cannot say that you're a Christian and then try to be able to stay at a level of, I want to hold on to this level of immaturity. I want to be just a Christian a little bit, and this is the level that I want. I'm perfectly comfortable with this level. You can't. You certainly can't be a Christian, or a healthy Christian. That the natural process of being Christian, God is about building up this maturity level. And spiritual maturity is a complete transformation of all areas of our life. And God is about doing that. That's what we've been talking about these last several weeks, about healing and taking us out of brokenness and loneliness and depression and hurt and all those things that we battle day in and day out about our life. And we come here on a Sunday sometimes, and it's like we get a taste of what heaven will be like when we're together and we're worshiping and we're having a great time. And then we go back out in the week, and it's like, oh, we're back in the dirt again, and it's ugh. But there's a process where God is working on us, and we can heal us through a lot of that, where we can be able to move beyond that kind of stuff. And so in that maturity process, God takes people in our life, as I said before, who exposes in us prejudice, or exposes in us our own issues of selfishness or whatever, and God is weeding out, refining us. You've heard the expression refiner's fire probably, where God is turning up the heat in our life so the impurity of our life gets burnt out and we're being matured. And that's what's happening. As a Christian, we are attached to Christ by our faith. It's who we are. And so when we grow, what's happening is we're growing closer to that relationship that we have with Christ. And we see it growing and developing. And that's what Paul talks about here when he's saying that as we're growing in our faith. In verse 13, we become more in the knowledge of the Son of God. Knowledge being a knowing, not a head knowledge, but a relationship kind of a knowledge. Becoming mature, he says, attaining the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. He's describing that as we grow, we experience more and more Christ in us, and we become more and more a radiancy of Christ to the people around us. And then you multiply that by the people in this room and in the church, and before you know it, people start to see Christ all over the place, and they're drawn into the church as you are around other people and being an influence, because they're not because of you. Oh, I want to go where Mark goes. No, I want whatever it is that you guys have, because I feel broken and alone. And we see the fullness and this radiancy of Christ coming out. The word in here, what really holds us to that is this idea of truth. Verse 15, he says, when they talk about the immature, he says, instead, speaking the truth in love. Now, word truth is actually, the Greek word is a verb. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. That's an expression that was in John 14:6 Jesus used. So truth is Christ. What Paul is saying, though, is that as we radiate Christ and we allow our life to be governed by truth. So when we walk into a situation, whether it's in a life group or whether it's with a personal with someone, and we're talking about, here's my situation, you start talking about it, and someone, and they oftentimes friends are the best ones, says the truth and says, Mark, here's your problem. You're just thinking of yourself, blah, blah, blah. And we don't like the truth sometimes. But if we're grounded in truth and we're speaking the truth in love, it's the grounding of that truth that helps us be able to be transformed and changed, and with a desire of, look, I don't want to go where I want to go. I don't want to seek a life that is based on what I want. I want to seek a life based on what I know God wants, because I know it's the best life I could possibly have. And to do that, I have to ground my life in truth, and I have to allow people around me who are going to expose the untruths of my life, and I got to be involved in ways to where in all of that, we become together in this sense of truth that brings us into this, conforming us to what Christ is all about. And it's, the idea of we are the light of the world, and it's one light and two lights, three lights. And before you know it, as a church, we just radiate Christ all over the place. That's the health that is being described when we come together as a body. When these weeks that we've talked about, that's what's being described, is this growth process that is happening. That is, we call living as Christians. Paul said in Philippians that the greatest thing we could have is to know Christ. It's the greatest thing we could have. Every one of us sits in this room probably with ambitions we think are great. And yet Paul says they're rubbish compared to the surpassing greatness of knowing Christ. Do you believe that? I go back to the question, why are you here? Are you here because someone tells you you need to be here? Are you here to satisfy and please someone else? Are you here because it's a status thing and it gives an appearance of doing church and being a Christian and good? If you are, it's for the wrong reasons. You will never experience the kind of health that God intends for you to be able to have. The good news is that you're here anyway, is that you're put in a room where God will continue to work on you. And He's going to work on people around you who you're going to find irritating, because they're going to rock your boat, and they're going to not be satisfied with the fact that you say, you know what, this is just who I am, and yeah, I'm really nice, and but we don't do that on during the week. I don't have time for that, or like we shared before, that we would have 100 excuses of why we do it. And people will come along you and say, I'm sorry, but that isn't good enough. Not if you truly want to know Christ. I mean, if you want to have the appearance of being a Christian, sure, go for it. But you're wasting time, because you're missing it. You're having a false sense of what it is, and you're never going to feel the full experience of Christ being at work in your life, of knowing Him personally, of having the kind of hope and assurance that you can have regardless of the circumstances around you, of being used, as was described here, that you're a part of earlier by Steve, of something bigger than yourself. That all of a sudden life is not about me and me balancing things to work in my life, but all of a sudden my life is insignificant and I'm being used for something bigger than myself. That's what happens when you allow yourself to be invested into the body. It can't happen sitting in seats. It won't happen sitting here on a Sunday and just doing an hour. It has to be more than that. I want to encourage you that Heartland, our desire is to make Heartland a safe place for that to happen. I mean, we're figuring out as we go, but certainly that is our intent. It is a place for you to come and feel safe enough to discover this together. And for some of you, this will be the first time that you'll do that. You've been coming here, and some of them, I didn't want to say it, but Pat did. So 4 years. Finally, he figures it out. I'm in his group, so I know him well enough now I can give him a hard time. But it's like, that's 3 years and 6 months and so many days that missed out on all that could happen if it had got engaged. And so it will take a step of faith in your part to say, we got to do this. We know it's the right thing to do, and it goes against all the things that Satan's going to convince us we don't want to do, but we got to do this because the greater desire is to truly have that kind of faith and experience and knowledge of who Christ is, that maturity, the fullness of Christ in my life, to where I truly know what it's like to walk in His presence. And so I want to challenge you to start taking that step in those faith. We're wrapping up these groups. We're going to start again in January. There's social events you can do it. Just standing around talking to people. Write me a note. We can help figure out where you are. Last week we talked about the spiritual gift inventory that's online. You can download. Other shape things that we can do to help you start to figure out, what has God wired me to do? If I'm in this body and I play a role in it, what is it? Well, we'll help you figure it out. And we'll try. Our commitment is to try to put you where God wants you to be, not where we want you to be.